listening to Rogue Table Talks. Here's Mike.
Okay, here we are. Rogue Table Talks. This is Mike.
Here we
That's
are,
Chad.
TT.
Here we are, TT. Number 109.
Look, I represent the Upshot, too.
Upshot Coffee.
Come on.
All right, there we go. The local brand, RTT 109.
109.
PT 109. Patrol Boat 109, I think. World War II era. John F. Kennedy. Is this ringing a bell at all to you? Nothing?
Nope,
You got nothing.
Sorry.
Yeah,
you
got
lost
nothing.
me on that one.
Yeah, I think JFK. Something about 109. It's important. It's important for reasons that we will divulge later. So we are going to talk about stories and movies and sort of a biblical representation of stories and movies as we go along the way. And as we get started, wanted to mention we do have a website, roguetabletalks.com. .com. And we'll basically, that'll be a nice little portal for recent episodes. And we have a YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and just search for Rogue Table Talks, you'll find our channel. And there's only just a few most recent ones. We'll upload some older ones up there later.
Do we have swag, like pictures of Mike and Chad, 5x7s?
That's coming.
Like that?
Yeah, we need merch.
Okay.
We need merch for the site.
We need some merch.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then, of course, subscribe to Rogue Table Talks, the podcast, at all the various places one subscribes to such things. Stitcher and Apple and Google and so on and so on. Wherever you're listening to this, keep listening to it. And rate and subscribe and all of that. But today, here we are to talk about stories, culture, and how all of that might play together. We'll talk about it over the next few times together. And I just thought maybe we should sort of take a step back and think about a story and culture. And so, I don't know, I kind of want to just throw it out to you, just sort of, let's just freelance here. What are some aspects of a biblical view of culture? How would you describe, how should we understand culture? How should we exist within it? Just go.
Yeah. Go. All right. First, this is jazz riff here. I think it's important for each person to take responsibility to be able to articulate your view of culture and as a Christian. And what I mean by that is not what you think, but how you live. Like not what you say, but what you actually do. If you think it's okay for Christians to go to the movies and watch an R-rated movie, but you say that, but you never do it, and you might mildly judge someone who does, then what you do, actions speak louder than words. That's your view. And vice versa. If you say, I think there's things Christians shouldn't engage in and we should, kind of retreat from that, but you don't, I would just say everyone needs to be able to articulate what are you doing right now with your engagement in culture before you start to think about, okay, well, what does the Bible invite us to? I think there's some faulty ways to view the culture. I think one of the most faulty ways is that the culture is out there, and that the church is over here. Like we're not a part of the culture. I'm not a part of the culture.
Yep.
I mean, that's just not true. Look at my clothes. Look at my hat. Look at my Spotify playlist. Look at my books. Look at my Netflix queue.
Right.
Like Christians are in the culture. And that's a good thing. That's
right.
a good thing.
Yeah, it's unavoidable. So, we ought to think about it. And I think what, your sort of your initial point is that the whole topic of culture seems loaded and fraught for some Christians because if you've been a Christian for a while or grew up in the church, which I didn't really, I became a Christian when I was a teenager. This sense of what's something that's acceptable for a Christian to do culturally is sort of in the background.
Hmm.
Now, of course, that's not a horrible question, as you're saying, but it's good for us to be clear about it. But I would say then, there's no safe ground in which we can let's just withdraw from the whole, just to be safe, let's just withdraw from the culture. Well, it's not
Hmm.
possible. We are being acted upon by the culture. We act on the culture. It's hard. It's impossible to, not be a part of the changes in the world that are expressed culturally. The internet, the always on, all sorts of things that we become acculturated to. Um, and so it's plus if we are called to be missional in the here and now, we're called to be missional in this culture. Paul uses the uh, illustration of ambassador, that we are ambassadors. We have this ministry, this message of reconciliation to bring people to God in Christ. And in order to be ambassador, we have to understand the people to whom we're called, what messages resonate, what's something you should say, what's something you shouldn't say. How does all that work? Well, all of that are in some ways are intertwined with culture. So it's important for us to understand what do people in our culture think about the future? What do they think about love? What do they think about, what are they afraid of? What do they hope for? And, cultural expressions are one way we know that movies, books, TV shows, articles that we read is a window into this culture to which we're called. We're a part of it, as you said, but we're also called to it.
Well, I
And
think I think
Go ahead.
too the lens. What is the lens through which we think about culture is probably important to identify as well, because I did grow up in the church, and for most of us, the initial lens we thought through everything was, is it right or wrong? Is it good or bad? And what that does, if that's the initial question and perhaps the only question, unidimensional question, is it hinders me from hearing anything, as you just said, listen to the culture. What do we know? What they think? Of asking any more questions about, what is this story saying? What is it saying about the meaning of life, or where to find purpose, or how I'm stuck in despair? What is this song saying? What's the author trying to communicate, and what aspect of reality does it coincide with? So what that does is, what if we started to think through stories, culture, art, their information. They're not necessarily, is it good or bad, right or wrong. I mean, there's a value judgment we do need to place on it. But what if that's one piece of nine pieces?
Right.
You see what I
Yep.
mean?
Yep.
And because there is good art and bad art, and there is good music and bad music.
And there's art to which, according to my own fallenness and proclivities, I should probably avoid that. And we all can think
Sure.
of extreme examples of, uh, what that might be for different people. Probably different people have different lines that they can draw. I think the good and bad thing, I think you're right, that there's a sense of that's bad to be avoided. That's good. We can and entertain ourselves with this culture because it's good, and that's bad, so we must avoid. And in a sense, when it comes to humans and culture, that's really pretty. It's a distortion of a bigger biblical reality where we are good, fallen,
Hmm.
that we are image bearers. We were part of the original good creation. We bear the image of God. That part is good.
Yeah.
And fallen, we've experienced the fall. So we blur the image of God. We mar the image of God. So Mozart can be a bad guy and make beautiful music,
Hmm.
and we can appreciate the beauty of Mozart's music. The only reason he can create beauty is because he's an image bearer, and
Yeah.
that beauty represents God, even if Mozart doesn't believe in God. And so that complicates the picture then greatly. So all sorts of movies have some possibility of a mix of image bearing and fallenness. And while interplay is going on, they're saying something about the world, about love, about meaning, about purpose, about sacrifice, redemption. All of these things are all happening at the same time. And so it's
I
not
think.
not
Go
good
ahead.
enough
Oh,
just to
go
say
ahead.
good, bad, avoid, okay.
It's not enough. It's too simplistic,
Right.
and it's, maybe for early teenagers you need to teach something like that, but you have to grow up and you have to think through things better. So I think you just stated the complexity of the issue, and some people might say, well, I don't listen to that music because they're not a Christian, or because they say a curse word, or they seem to talk about sexuality in a way that's just uncomfortable, or I don't agree with it. Okay, okay. But most people, I realize I'm coming in hot today, but most people would say, but classical music is great. Christians should and encourage, and we should listen to classical music. But you just painted a very complex picture, and because Mozart, for all accounts of history, was incredibly licentious,
Mm-hmm.
didn't fear God, did
Mm-hmm.
anything he wanted to do,
Right.
but wrote beautiful music. So the author, as a character, seemed to be a pagan,
Right.
and lived like it and flaunted it, but also wrote very beautiful music. So you're saying, with that illustration, you're saying it's much more complex than um, we tend to want to make it.
Yeah, so that's part of the thing, and then part of the thing then too is missionally we are called to wade into that complexity so that we can be ambassadors, so that we can bring the gospel, so that we can bear the truth of the kingdom in this particular culture. So there's no safe road, because the safe road to withdraw, you probably can't, and B, you're sort of burying your talent in the ground and trying to play it safe, but you're not going to play it safe,
Mm-hmm.
because you know, and Paul says this a number of times in 2 Corinthians 5. He uses the ambassador thing, that we have this in, I think it's in 1 Corinthians 9. He says, to the Jews I became like the Jew to win the Jews. So, what he's saying is, I sort of identified with culturally these different groups of people, those under the law, those with the law, in order to win them. To the weak I became the weak to win the weak. That, there's a certain level of identification that we're called to, so that we can build a bridge, so that we can live out the gospel in their presence, so that we can
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And then another thing, I think it's 1 Corinthians 5, where Paul says, hey, you misunderstood me a little bit here. I said, don't associate with sexually immoral people. Not at all meaning the people of the world, of course, because then you'd have to withdraw from the world. You can't not associate with sexually immoral people or swindlers or idolaters or whatever, because then you'd have to. I meant in the church, but in the world, I mean, obviously you have to be. Jesus went to the parties, all this stuff. Like, that's the whole notion, that we can withdraw and not associate with sinful something, is a flawed view of the world and our mission. I mean, obviously Jesus associated with sinners to reach sinners.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously we're called to that. That's going to mean engagement with our culture missionally. So it's sort of it's a requirement to live out our identity in the church.
Yeah, and I would also say another aspect of that is, it's not just a calling and a mission, like you should go do this. I would argue this: you're already in the thing.
Yeah, yeah.
It,
You
the
can't you
reality,
can't
it's
get
like,
A, you can't get away from it. B, you should do it. Right.
exactly, exactly. It's
Yeah.
it's not only something I should do; it's something I am, and I'm. It's like when Merry and Pippin are talking to the Ents, and they don't want to go to war, and they say, "But you're a part of this world.
Yeah.
Like, you're just
Right.
in it.
Right. You
You're
can't get
making
away.
culture. Others are. Yeah,
Yeah.
other making culture. It's overlapping.
Yeah, so this question of just how well or poorly are you going to do? How well or poorly are you going to be salt and light? And of course, to be light, you got to go to a dark place, or what's the point? And I think obviously that's not simple. That's not very clear cut, and there's no list of movies to avoid or books to. It doesn't lend itself to that sort of cultural analysis,
Hmm.
or understanding, and I think that can make us uncomfortable, to a big degree. But I think it's a requirement, and one of the ways we see it, and I think as we talk in the next few weeks, we'll probably come back to a lot of these passages: 2 Corinthians 5, 1 Corinthians 9, 1 Corinthians 5, and then Acts 17. where Paul's in Athens, and there's a couple things that go on there that we can talk about over the next few weeks. But one of them is he quotes their philosophers and their poets in the midst of telling them about God in a language that they can understand. So he doesn't talk about Abraham, law, Moses, Israel. I mean, that doesn't mean anything to them. He talks about in a language that they can understand. So he has to know something about them and their culture in order to do that. And then he quotes, their philosophers and poets, where the philosophers and poets, as image bearers, are saying something true about God, as your own poets have said. He says, which is an illustration of what we're talking about. A, and B, of course, means Paul must have read them.
Well, Paul was well read.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he didn't just read his Bible. In order to quote poetry, you're talking about it, you're dissecting it, you're reading it. I mean, there's a breadth and depth to Paul's educational level and intelligence that, he let's put it contemporary. He's reading Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins. He's watching movies that have elements of truth in them, but twist elements of truth. He's engaging in the world around him. I don't know how you get around that with Paul.
Right.
Paul's ability to go into this place and say, as your poets have said.
Right. That's right. Yes, that's exactly right. And so that's why it's important for us and good for us, because I think there's a lot of negative, negative and sort of not only non-missional but damaging stuff that can happen to us if we try to live the withdrawn from the world thing. I mean, I think essentially that's what a lot of the Pharisees did. Then we can maybe come back to that, later on. But I think it's good and important for us to experience art as art, to experience, to investigate, excellent poets and philosophers, as Paul was doing, which in our day might be movies and TV shows and novels. Mm-hmm. That's how ideas are getting communicated to us. Not going there like I'm not sure Paul is reading all of their philosophers and poets trying to with a highlighter, trying to find I can use this in a gospel presentation one day. Mm-hmm. He's just reading it to understand it, and that in understanding it he can now draw it in. So I think that's our challenge. And having said all of that, some things you might draw a line. I don't think I really want to watch that thing. There's plenty of things to watch. I don't think I really want to read that thing. There's plenty of things to read. But what am I going to engage with? And knowing that everything can bear the image and that expresses some fallenness, and that before I talk about a particular movie, one of the things you said about the whole it's out there, that the badness is out there to be avoided. I think that's just essentially false. I mean, there's some sense, of course, that's true, that porn is out there, you probably shouldn't watch porn. Sure. But at some point in the larger culture that we're all experiencing, the overwhelming message, I think, of the New Testament, and especially the Sermon on the Mount, is the badness is in here primarily. My heart is the place where sin can occur, and I can then make Scripture a source of my sin. If I'm going to Scripture to validate my pre-existing beliefs and to be proud and harsh like the Pharisees did, and they were very scriptural and very sinful at the same time. And the problem wasn't Scripture. The problem was their own heart.
Yeah, the problem wasn't Scripture. The problem, and that's where I think, yes, there's elements of evil out there. That's for sure. But if you're just talking about things that are in a society, and religion is a part of it, so the church is a part of it, and there's the church, and then there's journalism and politics and economics and entertainment and arts and all education, all of these things. Like I think it was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian novelist. Like the line of good and evil is not between the church and the world.
Hmm.
It's right down the middle of every human heart,
Right. Right.
and that includes the church. And so
Hmm.
you can almost draw a visual of here's the church, and then here's this line of evil. Evil is out there, and church, and that's just not true. Church is in a part of the society, a part of the culture, and the line of good and evil goes right down everything that is existing in the world.
Hmm. So let's maybe talk about a movie.
All right.
And one of the movie I want to kind of want to talk about because it fits in with this sense of there are big themes in this movie, and you don't go to the theater to watch this movie looking for the big themes in this movie. So to me, it's a good example from that standpoint. But The Dark Knight, uh, you've got the
Batman.
Batman. So it's a cartoon. It's a superhero cartoon character depiction. But Christopher Nolan's version of it in The Dark Knight, um, there's a lot of this going on. And let's start with Batman. What's Batman's deal? What's Batman about? What's he doing?
uh, what's his? He's let's see, fighting crime, but he's also trying to exercise his own demons of fear and grief and uh, the loss of his parents. You know, having experienced childhood trauma with the murder of his family, he's out to be a force of justice because there's
Right.
so much injustice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's good. Right. He's out to protect the people of Gotham from a fate he suffered as a child. And the depiction of Gotham when he was a child, it was pretty rough. And he's trying to cleaned it up, and he's fighting the bad people. And so there's this sense that he's existing to be a protector, to be a cause of justice. Uh, and the police force is a very um, sort of mixed bag, I guess is one way of saying it. Here, there's some good people and bad people, and Batman seems to be the one who comes to the rescue. So that's part of the backdrop of the story. But the interesting part then of the story is the interplay with the Joker, uh, and so the
Well, in its
Joker,
most basic sense, it's a battle between good and evil, right?
in its
Its
most
most
basic
basic
sense,
form.
it's a battle between good and evil. As we've said, Bruce Wayne, Batman, is not the angelic personification of all things good, but he's on the side of justice, protection, order, peace. He wants to think well of people. He wants to redeem, uh, and the Joker is just the opposite. And there's that story where well, what's his name, Alfred, tells the story of some people just want to watch the world burn, and
Hmm.
that's he's saying I think I think the Joker is this sort of person who is not he's not trying to get money. He's trying to cause chaos and disorder, and he's trying to corrupt, and he wants to corrupt he wants to corrupt Batman. He wants to corrupt people. He does corrupt Harvey Dent and makes him into Harvey
Hmm.
Two-Face, right? uh
Hmm.
there's an episode where there's two ships, in this kind of towards the end of the movie, this confrontation, and what he wants is one ship to blow the other ship up.
Well, isn't
So
it like one ship has a bunch of the, criminals from
right,
Gotham,
right,
and the other ship has, upstanding citizens,
right,
and he gives each other a detonator
to blow the other ship up.
to blow the other ship
Yeah,
up.
telling them at midnight he's going to blow them both up,
Right.
and they don't do it. Yeah,
Which
he
is
want
just a freaking amazing part of the movie that
yeah,
you're like, what's going to happen, and then
Right.
this to me. Sorry to interrupt, but this is the beauty of you're looking at a good thing fallen. And Christopher Nolan, I don't know if he's a Christian or not, but he's making this movie and telling a story, and all of a sudden you see that these criminals who you would just think, oh, these are bad people, but they won't kill innocent people. They don't
Hmm.
do it.
Right.
It's just this emergence of, oh, because not everything is wholly bad and not every person is wholly lost,
Right.
and God's image is still lurking in there.
That's right. That's right. So, contra the Joker, these criminals are, they're the personification of a good thing fallen, and their
Hmm.
fallenness got the better of them at some point in their life. They're criminals, but they're not just going to murder a bunch of people. Uh, and um, and I think that's the whole one of the most realistic depictions of evil, one of those biblical depictions of evil I think that I've seen in popular culture, because that's what I think we think the devil wants to get us to do bad things, uh, which is a very limited view of what the devil wants to do. The devil wants to corrupt us. I mean,
Hmm.
you know, Jesus is in the wilderness. Satan, it doesn't, it is not, you know, in the wilderness killing Jesus. He
Well, we
wants to
think
corrupt
Satan's
him.
just out to destroy and harm and just end it. And I think he would much rather sow seeds of discord and doubt and despair. And,
Right.
if you can turn a good thing bad, then you are a brilliant and notorious villain.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's what, Satan tries to get Jesus to eat the bread. He doesn't doesn't try to kill Jesus. He tries to corrupt him. And I think you see that, okay, that's in a movie. I don't think Christopher Nolan is a believer. I don't know that he is or isn't, but it's a very realistic depiction of evil that should cause me to, see the biblical depiction. It's true. There's a truth to it because he's an image bearer. He sees something true about the world, and he can illuminate that via story in a way that I go, oh yeah, that really is what the devil's about. It's about not just a bad outcome, but about corrupting me so that I contribute to more bad outcomes in the future.
Hmm.
And I think that's um, okay, that's a whole, now it's a bigger game, it's a bigger stakes and so on. So whatever else you do with that, it's a small example of, here's a story that's really showing me something true because an image bearer is making it that I should really think about. And I'm not sure I would ever use that, in a conversation with somebody about the gospel, but I might. But I might.
Sure.
If somebody
But I
asks
might.
me, like, what do you think the devil's like? It's a little like the Joker in The Dark Knight. He wants to watch the world burn. Uh, he wants to corrupt. It's not like he's out for money, you know. In fact, in The Dark Knight, the Joker um, burns a whole big pile of cash, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And the other villains are like, "What?" And that's like at that moment they realize, "Oh, this is a crazy person. Like we
But
just
you
thought he
know he's the
wanted."
real villain.
Yes, that's right. At
It's
that
not
point, they're
power and
scared of
money.
him. Right, right.
He wants to twist anything good. And this is why it's so brilliant, because this is what, not just malevolence, evil, but this is what sin is. It's a parasite on God's good creation, taking something that is good and twisting it.
Yeah,
It's just like anything we see in God's creation: sex, food, our bodies, relationships, anything. And all of this was pronounced good because humans are humans and humans are supposed to make culture. Being culture makers is a really, really good thing for humanity to do. God never condemns that. Uh, what he does condemn is sin, and sin wants to corrupt the goodness of humanity and has corrupted the goodness of
corrupt the
humanity,
culture making, and right.
corrupt the culture making. And now, and this is why pornography is so bad, because it's not just that um, a degradation of sexuality, because now it's a degradation of power and money and
Hmm.
all of these other things that are good. They're part of economic systems, but now it's become corrupt, and it's not just the sex part, right?
Right.
That's part of it, but
Right.
it's this whole industry now
Hmm.
that's powerful. But it's sin is corrupting all of this stuff.
Yeah, and I think kind of back to then our original point is that um, that sounds scary maybe, and I kind of would rather think that wasn't true, and I'd rather think that we live in a monoculture where everyone sort of knows what's right and wrong, and so we don't really participate in depictions where bad things happen.
Hmm.
Um, but we that is not the world we live in, and if you're going to avoid any piece of art or culture where bad things happen, well, it's just not possible. You're lying to yourself, actually. And that if you're going to avoid all manifestations of a culture that are not completely biblical, again, you're lying to yourself, and you're misled because, of course, a lot of it, there might be nothing wrong with the manifestation of culture, but the problem is in me. Um, and so then how do we live? How do we live in this world? And I think partly one of the ways in which I want to think about that is what does it mean for me to be an image bearer, to be made more and more into the image of Christ, and to live that out for lost people? There's no way that I can do any of that without some wise and strategic interaction with culture,
Hmm.
because culture is just people interacting with each other and with creation and with other culture.
With
And
storytelling and meaning, and they're looking for things that shape us and
right.
provide value and value judgments, and we're constantly checking in with each other. What's going on in the world today? Is this good? Is this bad? How do we go forward as individuals and humanity? How do we make our way in the world? We're constantly checking in, and that's why these stories, uh, the Bible is a collection of stories, and it's the same thing. These stories shaped them, they gave them purpose and meaning, and they passed them down. And there's a lot of stories around today, and people are looking for meaning and purpose in stories. You said one thing, how do we engage wisely? I know we've been kind of hammering one viewpoint that's kind of a withdrawal from the culture, but let me just say there's an equally flawed viewpoint as well, which is, I don't. There's one point of I don't want to be entertained by something like that, and the other side is equally flawed, which is I simply want to be entertained
Yeah.
by something like that. So I haven't. Batman. I have no idea what it's about. I mean, I watched it. I thought it was a good movie, but I
Cool
have no
looking.
idea.
It's cool
That was
looking.
good. I want to go fight crime.
Yeah, and yeah, there is no withdrawal is an impossibility, but also to be merely entertained is an impossibility.
Hmm.
That if we are seeking that, we are imbibing some message. We're just not conscious of it, and so
We're just not
therefore
aware of it.
we're not aware of it. Right. Um, and so yeah, is there some line at which some things are more frivolous than others, and that's fine? Sure, absolutely. But to have that be the dominant mode of your interaction with culture just sort of means you're going to be more of a frivolous person, and live a more frivolous life. That to think about, what is Christopher Nolan saying about the world when when he makes of Joker be this person, which is a conscious choice, obviously, is something that it's good to think about. And uh, I do think that that there is a um, to be salt and light, to use that uh, illustration that Jesus has used. Yes, to be light, it doesn't make any sense to cover the light with a bowl because there's no light. It also means we've got to go into the world and illuminate a dark place. But he says if the salt loses its savoriness, its saltiness. In other words, if we just assimilate, capitulate, and be identical with the world around us, if there's nothing distinctive about us,
Right.
then the point of cultural interaction is lost as well.
Mm-hmm.
So to withdraw is a false paradigm, but also just to dive in and say, yeah, all this is fine. Nothing matters.
Right.
We're free in Christ.
To live uncritically.
Right.
To live unaware.
Yeah. Now I've lost my distinctiveness and lost my saltiness, and it's good for nothing. And so that's the balance.
Stay salty.
Stay salty, people. I should have ended on
There you
that.
go.
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, and so that's the thing. And so as the next few weeks we can talk about some of these themes and some of these passages maybe in more depth. But that is our that's our point in our calling is to think critically about how we interact with culture. Also, one thing that I think you said about story, and the reason the reason it's important is because we experience truths told in story differently than we do if we're just reading 5 bullet points about evil. Evil means when we see it. Now we interact with it at a deeper level, or even it sneaks up on us, and we're not looking for it. We don't see it coming, and I think part of that is because we're in this big story, and some truths are best communicated in story. As you said, the Bible has lots of stories in it.
And it is a story.
It is a
And
story.
that's what original meaning of myth was. It wasn't a farce. It was something so true it had to be communicated in story form.
Right. Yes. And I think it's the difference between saying, here's 10 aspects of romantic love that are true. Okay, you could do that. You can convey information, but it's very limited. But you can tell a love story, which would display all of these in ways that now I get it at a much deeper and bigger level. And that's why it's important, because that's how our culture is expressing what they really believe, what they're really afraid of, what they really think about the world and the future. All that is coming out in story form, typically, in culture. I mean, you can watch TED Talks, and it's there too, but it's more profoundly there in stories that our culture is telling. So remember the story you're in, engage in this story, and I think, let's begin to think about how we can do that in a way that allows us to be ambassadors and to carry this ministry of reconciliation forward and to experience the beauty that God has to offer to us. So with that, let's end it there, and stay salty, people.
Stay salty.
Stay salty, people.
Thanks for listening to Rogue Table Talks. Be sure you're subscribed to our podcast wherever you listen and on our YouTube channel. Just search Rogue Table Talks.